The iron shackles around Wade's wrists had grown warm under the desert sun, but they felt cold as winter against his skin. Each link in those heavy chains was a life he'd taken. Another outlaw dragged back to face frontier justice. The townsfolk of Petition Ridge had made them special, just for him. Thick enough to hold a giant, heavy enough to remind him of his sins with every single breath. 10 years ago, Wade Garrison was a different man. He owned a small ranch 15 miles south of here. A place where the creek ran clear and the grass grew sweet. His wife, Catherine, tended a garden that bloomed with wildflowers, and their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, collected smooth stones from the creek bed. She pressed flowers between the pages of her prayer book. Wade remembered that life. Catherine humming while she kneaded bread. Emma's laughter echoing from the barn. He was a man who carved wooden toys for his little girl. A man who read scripture by lamplight. A man who believed hard work and honest living would keep his family safe. That belief was shattered on a Tuesday morning in April. The Vasquez raiders swept down from the hills like a plague. Wade was mending a fence in the far pasture when he heard the screams. By the time he reached the ranch house, smoke was already pouring from the barn. Catherine lay in the doorway, her blue dress torn and bloodied. Her hand was reaching toward the root cellar, where Emma might have hidden. But the cellar door hung open, splintered and broken. He found Emma 20 yards into the woods. Her small body was curled around her prayer book, as if it could shield her from all the world's cruelty. The raiders took everything. The cattle, the horses, the silver dollars Catherine kept hidden in a coffee tin. But they left behind something far worse. The man who walked out of that burning ranch was no longer Wade Garrison. He was Iron Wade. A name whispered in saloons from here to Santa Fe. He traded his carpenter's tools for a Colt revolver and a Winchester rifle. He learned to track men across stone and sand. For 10 years, he was the law's most effective weapon. He didn't negotiate. He didn't take prisoners. He didn't believe in mercy. But somewhere along the way, the people of Petition Ridge decided their weapon had become too sharp, too dangerous. Maybe it was the morning he dragged in 3 horse thieves, all dead. Maybe it was the night he shot a card sharp in front of half the town. Or maybe it was just the way children crossed the street when they saw him coming. Yesterday, Mayor Pritchard and 5 other men came to his room at the boarding house. "You've become what you hunt, Wade," Pritchard had said, his voice shaking. "We can't have a killer living among us." They bound him in these heavy chains and dragged him to the town square. Now he sat chained to a post in the blazing sun, watching them gather for his execution. Men he'd protected. Women whose property he'd recovered. They looked at him now with fear and disgust, as if they'd forgotten someone had to do the ugly work of keeping the wolves away. Among the crowd, Wade noticed a small figure in a faded blue dress. A girl of maybe 10, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Hope Morrison, the preacher's ward. She'd arrived 3 years ago, another orphan of the territory's violence. Wade had always noticed her because she reminded him painfully of Emma. Not in looks, but in the careful way she moved through the world, as if she understood that life was fragile. The girl stood apart, watching Wade with an expression he couldn't read. There was no fear in her eyes. No hatred. If anything, she looked sad. The executioner, a nervous man named Tobias Creek, checked his rifle. Mayor Pritchard stepped forward, a piece of paper trembling in his hand. "Wade Garrison," he began, "you have been found guilty of murder, excessive violence, and disturbing the peace. Have you any last words?" Wade looked at the faces around him. Faces he'd bled for. Damned his soul for. "Just get it done," he said, his voice rough as gravel. Pritchard nodded to Tobias, who raised his rifle. The crowd held its breath. That's when Hope Morrison stepped forward. The movement was so unexpected, so deliberate, that people gasped. Reverend Morrison reached for her, but she was already walking toward the execution post. Her small feet raised puffs of dust with each step. She walked straight up to Wade as if approaching a wounded animal. Careful, but unafraid. When she reached him, she knelt in the dust, bringing her face level with his. Wade stared at her, this small child who dared to approach the monster. Up close, her eyes were even more startling. Deep brown, flecked with gold, holding a depth of understanding that seemed impossible. She leaned closer, her lips near his ear. Her voice was a whisper meant only for him. "Your Emma would want you to live." The words hit Wade like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. The name, Emma, hung between them like a prayer and a curse. "What did you say?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Hope's small hand reached into the pocket of her dress. She withdrew something that made Wade's heart stop. It was a tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped and worn smooth. He recognized it instantly. It had belonged to Catherine, his wife. Inside was a tiny photograph of their family. "I found this at your old ranch," Hope said softly, pressing the locket into his chained hands. Then she pulled out something else, a small worn Bible. "And this. It's filled with pressed flowers. Emma's flowers, weren't they?" Wade's fingers closed around the locket with desperate strength. His vision blurred as tears he hadn't shed in 10 years finally broke free. The crowd faded away. All that existed was this moment. This impossible gift from a child who knew his deepest secret. "How?" he choked out. "Reverend Morrison takes me to pray at abandoned places sometimes," Hope explained. "Places where families lived and loved before sorrow found them. Your ranch. There's still love there, Mr. Wade. I could feel it in the ashes." She glanced at the stunned crowd, then back at his face. Emma's prayer book was hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. She drew pictures in the margins, little horses and flowers. There was a wooden horse there, too. Carved by loving hands. Your hands. Wade's body began to shake. 10 years of buried grief clawing its way to the surface. The iron chains felt suddenly lighter, as if the weight crushing his soul was shifting. "She would want you to live," Hope repeated, her small hand covering his massive, scarred one. "Not for revenge, not for killing, but for love. The kind of love that carves wooden toys and presses flowers in Bibles." Mayor Pritchard stepped forward, his face flushed with confusion. "What's this child talking about?" But Reverend Morrison raised his hand for silence. He was watching the transformation. Wade's face, hard as granite for a decade, was crumbling like an old dam. "I couldn't save her," Wade sobbed, the words torn from his broken heart. "I couldn't save either of them. What kind of man fails to protect his own family?" "The kind of man who loved them more than his own life," Hope said firmly. "The kind of man who carved that little horse so his daughter would have something to hold when she was scared." She stood up, her small frame commanding the attention of the entire crowd. "This man you want to kill. He died 10 years ago when his family died. What you see here is just pain walking around in a man's body." Wade looked up at her through his tears. There was something ancient in her young eyes, a wisdom earned through suffering. She understood loss because she'd lived it too. "But pain doesn't have to win," Hope continued, addressing the crowd. "Emma's love is still alive in that Bible, in that wooden horse. Love like that doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to let it live again." She turned back to Wade, pulling a small brass key from her pocket. "I'm going to unlock your chains now, Mr. Wade. But first, you have to promise me something." Wade stared at the key, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "How do you have that?" "Mayor Pritchard's wife left it on Reverend Morrison's desk this morning," Hope said simply. "She said the Lord told her in a dream that mercy was needed today, not justice." From somewhere in the crowd, Mrs. Pritchard stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "It's true," she said. "I had the strangest dream. A little girl with flowers in her hair told me that killing a dead man won't bring anyone back to life." Hope knelt beside Wade again, the key hovering near the lock. "Promise me, Mr. Wade. Promise you'll try to live for love instead of pain. Promise you'll let Emma's memory make you gentle again." Wade looked into her eyes and saw his daughter there. Not in appearance, but in spirit. The same fierce innocence, the same unshakable faith in goodness. Emma would have grown up to be someone like Hope, someone who saw broken things and tried to heal them. "I promise," he whispered. The key turned in the lock with a soft click. The heavy chains fell away from his wrists like shed skin. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Hope helped him to his feet. He towered over her, a giant of a man freed by a child's faith. But there was nothing threatening about him now. He looked like what he was, a broken father trying to remember how to be human. "What happens now?" someone called from the crowd. Hope looked up at Wade with a smile that reminded him of every sunrise Emma had ever run to show him. "Now we go find the man who really deserves to pay for what happened to your family. Not with death. With real justice." Wade's hand went to his gun belt, but Hope caught his wrist. "Not with killing, Mr. Wade. With truth. With mercy. With the kind of justice Emma would be proud of." Tobias Creek lowered his rifle, his hands shaking with relief. Mayor Pritchard stood slack-jawed. Reverend Morrison stepped forward, his face bright with wonder. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. Hope took Wade's massive hand in her small one. "Come on, Mr. Wade. We have a lot of work to do, and Emma's been waiting 10 years for you to remember who you really are." As they walked away from the execution post together, the giant, broken man and the child who'd cracked his heart wide open, the crowd began to disperse in confused murmurs. The chains lay abandoned in the dust, empty iron circles that would never hold him again. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of red rock and sagebrush. Wade rode his black stallion, Ranger, while Hope sat perched behind him, her small arms wrapped around his waist. They'd left Petition Ridge hours ago, heading into a maze of canyons Wade knew better than any lawman. But for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't hunting. He was running. And it felt strange, like a wolf trying to remember how to be a dog. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Wade asked, breaking the silence. Hope's voice carried over the sound of hooves on stone. "Should I be?" "Everyone else is, even the men who hired me to kill for them." "But you're not killing anymore. Are you, Mr. Wade? You promised." The promise felt fragile, like spun glass. "What if they catch up to us? What if I have to choose between my word and keeping you safe?" "Then you'll find another way," Hope said with the absolute confidence of a child. Emma's papa would find another way. The mention of his daughter's name was still a blow, but different now. Not a crushing weight, but a warm ache that made him feel more alive. They rode deeper into the canyons, the red walls rising around them like the ribs of some ancient beast. "Tell me about her," Hope said softly. "Tell me about Emma." Wade's first instinct was to lock the memories away, but her voice was gentle, patient. The words came easier than they had in years. "She was fearless," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "Used to climb to the very top of our old oak tree, just to see how far she could see. Catherine would worry herself sick, but Emma would just laugh and wave from the branches like she was queen of the world." Hope's grip tightened, encouraging him. "She loved making things. Flower crowns for her mother, mud pies for me, pictures drawn with charcoal on barnwood, always creating something beautiful." His voice grew softer. "I used to carve little animals for her from scrap wood. She had a whole farm of them, horses, cows, even a tiny pig she named Bacon. The wooden horse I found," Hope said. You made that for her. Her 8th birthday. She'd been begging for a real horse, but we couldn't afford one yet. His voice caught. I thought I'd make her a wooden one to practice with. They rode in silence, winding deeper into the maze of rock. He remembered things he'd thought were lost forever. Emma's laugh when she found a new wildflower. The way she'd curl up against him during thunderstorms. Brave about everything except lightning. The memory was so vivid, so painfully sweet, that he almost missed it. Hoofbeats, echoing off the canyon walls, somewhere behind them. We've got company, Wade said, his body tensing for action. Hope twisted around. The posse? Most likely. Pritchard probably changed his mind. Wade's hand moved for his gun, then stopped as he remembered his promise. Hold tight. He urged Ranger faster, up a narrow trail that branched off from the main canyon. The path wound upward, leading toward a series of caves he'd used for shelter on previous hunts. But his mind wasn't on escape routes. He was thinking about the wooden horse. He'd carved it from apple wood, sanding it smooth, painting on a tiny bridle and saddle. Emma had named it Starlight. Mr. Wade, Hope's voice broke through his thoughts. What are you thinking about? That wooden horse. I'd forgotten how proud she was of it. She carried it everywhere for weeks, told everyone she met about her practice horse and how her papa was the best carver in the whole territory. They reached a cave just as the sound of pursuing horses grew louder. Wade dismounted, helped Hope down, and led Ranger into the shadows. Will they find us here? Hope asked, settling on a flat rock. Maybe, probably. He checked his weapons out of habit, then caught himself, deliberately moving his hands away. We'll figure something out. Hope reached into her small cloth satchel and withdrew something that made Wade's breath catch. It was the wooden horse. Its painted details were faded, but it was still recognizable. I thought you might want this back, she said, holding it out. His hands shook as he took the carved toy. He'd carved it with so much love, imagining Emma's joy. Now it felt like holding a piece of his own heart. Broken, but still beating. She loved it, he whispered. Even after we got her a real pony the next spring, she still kept Starlight on her nightstand. Said it was special because I made it just for her. Hope smiled, and for a moment, he could swear he saw Emma's spirit in her eyes. She knew you loved her, Mr. Wade. Even at the end, she knew. The hoofbeats grew closer. Their pursuers had found the trail, but instead of the cold calculation that usually took over, Wade felt something different. A fierce, protective warmth that had nothing to do with violence. He tucked the wooden horse into his vest pocket, right over his heart. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I won't let anyone hurt you, I promise. Hope nodded solemnly. And you won't hurt them either. You promised Emma that. Wade looked down at her upturned face, seeing his daughter's absolute faith reflected there. Something inside him shifted. The killer he'd been for 10 years was dying, replaced by something he thought was lost forever. A father, a protector, a man who carved wooden horses instead of digging graves. The cave system was deeper than he'd realized. They retreated to a large chamber where a natural chimney allowed for a small, smokeless fire. Outside, the posse had faded into the darkness, but Wade knew they were still there, waiting for morning. Patient hunters, just like he used to be. Hope sat across from him in the firelight, carefully arranging smooth river stones she'd collected from an underground stream. Each one was the size of a silver dollar. What are you doing? Wade asked. Making a pattern, she said, her young face serious. My mama taught me. She said sometimes when the world feels too big and scary, you can make something small and beautiful to remind yourself that not everything is broken. She arranged 7 stones in a circle, one in the center. The pattern was simple but pleasing, the surfaces catching the firelight like small moons. Tell me about your parents, Your real parents. Hope's hands stilled. Papa was a traveling preacher, like Reverend Morrison, but different. He believed God's love was for everyone, even outlaws and saloon girls. Mama was a missionary's daughter. She could speak 3 languages. She taught school wherever we settled. They sound like good people. They were. They loved each other something fierce, and they loved me the same way. She picked up another stone, this one different, smaller, perfectly smooth, carved with delicate script he couldn't make out. What's that one? She held it up. Carved into the surface in tiny, precise letters was a single word. Mercy. It was my name, she said simply. Before. Wade leaned forward. Before what? Before the raiders came. Before I watched them kill my parents. Before I spent 3 days hiding in a grain barrel, listening to men laugh about what they'd done. Her voice remained steady, but he caught the tremor underneath. Reverend Morrison renamed me Hope. Said I needed a name that looked forward. But I kept this to remember who I was before the world tried to break me. Mercy isn't just my old name. It's what my parents taught me to carry in my heart. She placed the mercy stone in the center of her pattern. Wade stared at it, understanding dawning like a sunrise. The raiders who killed your family, Hope finished quietly, were the same ones who killed yours. I know because I remember their leader, Diego Vasquez. He had a scar across his left cheek, shaped like a crescent moon, and he wore a silver cross he'd stolen from some church. I'll never forget his face. The fire crackled. Wade's hand went to his gun. 10 years of rage surged through him like a flash flood. Vasquez, the name that haunted his dreams. To know that the same monster had destroyed this child's family, too. I can see it in your eyes, Hope said, her voice gentle but firm. The killing fire. But that's not who you are anymore, Mr. Wade. That's not who Emma would want you to be. He forced his hand away from his weapon. He needs to pay for what he did. To all of us. Yes, he does. But not with more killing. She picked up the mercy stone again, holding it out. Take this. I can't. Please. It's not just my old name. It's what I'm giving you. What Emma would want me to give you. Her eyes met his across the fire. Mercy doesn't mean letting evil go unpunished. It means choosing to heal instead of hurt. His large, scarred hand closed around the small stone. He felt its warmth, and for a moment, a kind of peace he hadn't known since Emma died. How do you do it? He asked. How do you carry this much pain and still believe in goodness? She began gathering her stones. Because the alternative is becoming like them, like Vasquez, like the man you became after Emma died, and I won't let them win by turning me into something my parents wouldn't recognize. She looked up, her young face ancient with wisdom. Besides, I'm not carrying this pain alone anymore. I have you now, and you have me. That's what families do. They share the weight. Tears pricked Wade's eyes, not of rage or regret, but of something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. I don't know how to be a father again, he admitted. I don't know if I remember how. You start small, she said simply. You keep your promises. You choose mercy over vengeance. You carve wooden horses instead of digging graves. You let Emma's love live through you, instead of letting her death drive you. Outside, the desert wind howled. But inside their small circle of firelight, Wade felt peace. Purpose. The beginning of redemption. He tucked the mercy stone into his vest pocket beside the wooden horse. 2 small artifacts that carried the weight of love and forgiveness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he was just a man with a child who believed he could be better. And for now, that was enough. Dawn broke over the canyon rim. Wade woke to find Hope already stirring the fire. She'd let him sleep, taking watch herself. They're gone, she said softly. The posse. They pulled out an hour before sunrise. I heard them talking. They're heading back to Petition Ridge. Wade listened. Only the morning sounds of the desert. His instincts told him she was right. They were alone. "How did you know to keep watch?" he asked, impressed. Her smile was sad, but knowing. "Most children my age haven't spent 3 days hiding in a grain barrel, listening for footsteps that might mean death. You learn to sleep light." They broke their simple camp. As Wade saddled Ranger, Hope gathered more smooth stones. "Where are we going now?" He'd thought about it all night. His first instinct was to get her back to Reverend Morrison. But he knew their journey wasn't over. "There's a family settlement about 20 miles north. The Hendricks place. Good people who might need our help." She tilted her head, her eyes perceptive. "You think there might be trouble there?" Wade nodded grimly. "I've been tracking reports of raiders in that area for weeks. Nothing confirmed, but enough smoke to suggest fire. If Vasquez is still operating in this territory, then we should warn them," Hope finished. "And help them if we can." They rode north. The landscape was harsh but beautiful. Wade found himself seeing it differently. Not as a tactical environment, but as something worth protecting. "What made you start carving?" Hope asked. "The wooden horse for Emma." "My father taught me," Wade said. "He was a carpenter. Said working with your hands to create something beautiful was a way of praying without words." "Do you still remember how?" "I don't know. Haven't tried in 10 years. Hands that have killed as much as mine. I'm not sure they remember how to create anymore." "Hands don't remember," Hope said simply. "Hearts do. And your heart remembers Emma, which means it remembers love. That's all you need." They crested a rise and saw smoke. Not the thin smoke of a cooking fire, but thick, black columns that spoke of destruction. Wade's body tensed. His hand moved toward his gun before he caught himself. "The Hendricks place," he said grimly. They urged Ranger into a gallop. As they drew closer, he could see the homestead. A log cabin, a barn, a corral, or what was left of them. The barn was a skeleton of charred timbers. The cabin's roof had collapsed. And there were men moving around the wreckage. Bandits. "At least 6 of them," Wade said quietly, halting Ranger behind a screen of juniper trees. Hope peered around his shoulder, her face pale but determined. "Are there survivors?" He studied the scene. Near the cabin, he saw a group of people. A man, a woman, 2 children, sitting on the ground with their hands bound. They were alive, but prisoners. "The family's still breathing, for now." His old instincts kicked in. Assess, plan, strike hard and fast, kill them all. He'd done it 100 times, but Hope's small hand on his arm stopped him cold. "Remember your promise," she said quietly. "Remember who Emma would want you to be." He looked at her upturned face and felt the killing rage drain out of him. The tactical calculations were still there, but different now. How to save without killing. How to stop evil without becoming it. "I need to think," he said, dismounting. "Find another way." From his saddlebags, he withdrew a brass compass that had belonged to his father. A man who believed true north wasn't just a direction, but a moral principle. He held it in his palm, watching the needle swing, trying to find his own bearings. His father had never raised a hand in anger, solving problems with patience, not violence. "What would Papa do?" Wade whispered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud. Hope heard him. "He'd find a way to save them without becoming the thing he was fighting against. Just like you're going to do." Wade studied the compass needle. Negotiation, misdirection, using the bandits' greed against them. "I have an idea," he said slowly. "But it's risky. It means trusting me to do something I've never done before." "What's that?" He looked down at Hope, his decision crystallizing. Save people without killing anyone. even the people who probably deserve it. Her smile was brilliant with pride. Emma would be so proud of you, Mr. Wade. And so would your papa. Wade tucked the compass back into his vest, its weight settling against his heart next to the wooden horse and the mercy stone. 3 small artifacts pointing him toward the man he used to be, and the man he was choosing to become again. Wade's plan was audacious. He would ride in openly, presenting himself as exactly what the bandits would expect. A bounty hunter interested in profit, not heroics. "You'll stay hidden," he told Hope. "No matter what happens, you don't come out until I signal you." Her dark eyes were worried but trusting. "What if they recognize you? What if they know about Iron Wade?" "Then I improvise, but most raiders are too arrogant to worry about a lone rider." He mounted Ranger and rode slowly toward the homestead, his hands visible. As he approached, the bandits turned, weapons ready. The leader, a thin man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes, stepped forward. "That's far enough, stranger. State your business." Wade raised a hand in a peaceful gesture. "Name's Wade, bounty hunter. Heard gunfire and came to investigate." "Bounty hunter, eh?" The leader's eyes narrowed. "You got a name folks might know?" "Some call me Iron Wade," Wade said, watching the man's reaction. It was immediate. The leader's eyes widened. Several other bandits shifted nervously. His reputation had preceded him, just as he'd hoped. "Well, I'll be damned," the leader said, his tone shifting to respect. "Heard you were dead." "Greatly exaggerated," Wade replied with a slight smile. "Mind if I ask what you boys are up to?" "Professional curiosity." The leader gestured toward the bound family. "Found ourselves a nice little settlement. Figured these folks might have some valuables worth sharing. You interested in a cut?" Wade's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Depends on the cut, and what kind of resistance you've run into." "No resistance worth mentioning. Just a farmer, his wife, and a couple of cubs. Easy pickings." The leader's grin was ugly. "Though the woman's got some fight in her. Been entertaining to watch." The words were like physical blows, stoking the familiar fire of rage. His hand twitched toward his gun. Muscle memory screamed at him to draw and start shooting. These men deserved death. But then he felt the weight in his vest pocket. Emma's horse. Hope's stone. His father's compass. Reminders of who he was choosing to be. "Interesting," Wade said, dismounting slowly. "Mind if I take a look? Professional assessment." The leader waved him forward. "Of course. Always happy to show our work to a professional." Wade walked toward the bound family. The farmer was a man about his age, his eyes blazing with helpless fury. His wife clutched their 2 children, a boy of 12 and a girl no older than 10. The sight of the little girl, so close to Emma's age, nearly shattered his composure. But instead of rage, he felt a fierce, protective love. "What's their story?" Wade asked, crouching to examine the family's bonds. "Hendrick's family," the leader said. "Been here about 3 years. Should have a nice little nest egg stashed somewhere." Wade's fingers worked quickly at the rope binding the farmer's hands. To any casual observer, it looked like he was checking the knots. In reality, he was loosening them. "Smart thinking," Wade said, moving to the woman. "Though you might want to consider keeping them alive longer. Dead folks can't tell you where they hid the really valuable stuff." The leader's eyes lit up. "You think they're holding out?" "Always are," Wade said, now working on the children's bonds. The little girl looked up at him with eyes that reminded him painfully of Emma. "Question is whether you're patient enough to get it out of them without spoiling the merchandise." He stood up. "Tell you what. How about I show you how a professional handles this?" The leader was practically salivating. "Hell yes. Always wanted to see Iron Wade work." Wade nodded and drew his gun. But instead of shooting the bandits, he fired 3 quick shots into the air. The sharp cracks echoed off the canyon walls. "What the hell?" the leader started. "Federal marshals!" Wade shouted at the top of his lungs. "You're surrounded! Drop your weapons!" The bandits spun around in confusion, looking for the non-existent marshals. In that moment of chaos, Wade tackled the leader, wrestling his gun away. "Run!" he yelled to the Hendricks family. "Get to the trees!" The farmer, his bonds now loose, broke free and grabbed his wife and children. They scrambled toward the tree line where Hope was hidden. The other bandits were still looking wildly for the marshals. Wade used their confusion, moving quickly, using his size and training to disarm them without killing. It wasn't elegant. He took a hard blow to the ribs, and one man grazed his shoulder with a knife. But it worked. Within minutes, 6 bandits were on the ground, disarmed and thoroughly confused. "Where are the marshals?" one of them gasped. Wade holstered his gun, pulling out a length of rope. "What marshals? Just me and my partner." He gestured toward the trees where Hope was emerging, leading the Hendricks family to safety. The bandit leader stared in disbelief. "Your partner is a little girl?" "Don't let her size fool you," Wade said with genuine pride. "She's tougher than all of you put together." As he bound the bandits, Wade felt a satisfaction without bloodshed. He'd won. He'd saved innocent people, and he'd kept his promise. The little Hendricks girl ran up to him, her eyes bright with admiration. "Are you really Iron Wade, the famous bounty hunter?" Wade looked down at her. "I used to be," he said gently, "but I'm trying to be someone better now." Hope appeared at his side, her face glowing. "You did it, Mr. Wade. You saved them without becoming what you were fighting." Wade nodded, feeling the artifacts in his vest warm against his heart. The compass had pointed him true north after all. Not toward vengeance, but toward the kind of justice his father would have recognized. The kind Emma would have been proud of. "We all did it," he corrected, looking at Hope and then at the grateful Hendricks family. "Together." The Hendricks family invited them to share their evening meal, a simple stew made from salvaged vegetables. As the sun set, Wade found himself relaxing. The bound bandits were secured, and he'd sent a rider to the nearest marshal's office. Justice would be served, but through proper channels. Hope sat beside him, sketching in a small journal. She was drawing the Hendricks family, not as they were now, but as they might be in better times. Happy, peaceful, whole. "You're quite the artist," Wade observed. "Mama taught me," Hope said. "She said drawing people the way you hoped they'd be was a kind of prayer." Tom Hendricks, the farmer, approached with a cup of coffee. "Can't thank you enough for what you did today, Mr. Wade." Wade accepted the coffee. "Most folks don't travel with a conscience like this one," he said, nodding toward Hope. "She keeps me pointed in the right direction." "Still," Hendricks continued, "taking on 6 armed men without killing any of them, that takes a special kind of courage." Wade was about to deflect the praise when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of the bandits, a lean man with a scar across his cheek, was staring at Hope with an expression of dawning recognition. "Hey, boss," the scarred man called to their leader. "Take a look at that little girl. Don't she look familiar?" The bandit leader squinted through the darkness. Slowly, his face changed from confusion to surprise, to a kind of hunger. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, "if it ain't little Mercy herself." Hope's pencil stopped. Her small body went rigid. Wade set down his coffee cup, every instinct screaming danger. "What did you just say?" The scarred bandit grinned with malicious delight. "That little girl you're so fond of. She ain't who you think she is. That's Mercy Morrison, and she's worth more money than you can imagine." "You're mistaken," Wade said quietly. but there was steel in his voice. Am I? The leader's grin widened. Tell me, Mr. Ironwade, did she ever mention why Vasquez and his boys hit her family's wagon 3 years back? Or did you think that was just random bad luck? Hope finally looked up, her face pale. Her eyes met Wade's, and he saw the truth there. A truth she'd been carrying alone. Hope, he said softly. The bandit leader laughed. Hope? Is that what she's calling herself now? Sweet little Mercy Morrison, daughter of the missionary who stole something very valuable from our boss. Wade's hand moved for his gun, but Hope's small voice stopped him. It's true, she said quietly. Not all of it, but some of it. She closed her journal. When she looked up at Wade, there were tears in her eyes, but also a kind of relief, as if a heavy burden was finally being shared. My father didn't steal anything, she said firmly. But he did find something, a map, showing where Vasquez had been hiding the gold from all his raids. Papa was going to turn it over to the territorial marshal. The scarred bandit laughed. Except he never made it, did he? Vasquez caught up with him first. Hope's voice remained steady. Papa hid the map before they killed him. He and Mama both died protecting that secret. They died protecting me. The world shifted beneath Wade. Puzzle pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. You know where Vasquez's gold is hidden? Yes. Her voice was a whisper. Papa made me memorize it all before he hid the map. Every landmark, every distance. He said if anything happened to him, I was to give the information to the law. The bandit leader was practically vibrating with excitement. 3 years we've been looking for that girl. 3 years Vasquez has been tearing up the territory trying to find her. Do you have any idea what he'd pay to get his hands on her? Wade stood slowly, his hand resting openly on his gun. You're not getting your hands on anyone. Easy there, Iron Wade, the leader mocked. Think about what you're walking away from. Vasquez has been hoarding gold for 15 years, enough to buy your own territory. I don't want his money. No? Then how about revenge? The scarred bandit leaned forward eagerly. See? Here's the thing you don't know yet. Vasquez ain't just some random raider. He's got connections, friends in high places, some of them right there in Petition Ridge. Wade felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. What are you talking about? Why do you think he knew exactly when to hit your ranch? When you'd be away mending fence? When your wife and daughter would be home alone? The bandit's grin was triumphant. Someone told him, Wade. Someone who knew your habits, your schedule, your life. Hope gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. 10 years of assumptions crumbled like sand. You're lying. Am I? Then explain how he knew about the missionary family's route, how he knew they'd be traveling alone, how he knew what they were carrying. The bandit leaned back, savoring Wade's shock. Vasquez has been getting information from someone on the inside for years, someone who helps him pick his targets. Wade's mind raced, someone he'd trusted, someone from Petition Ridge had fed information to the man who destroyed his family, someone who knew when he'd be away, when Catherine and Emma would be vulnerable. Who? The word came out as a growl. Ah, now that's the million-dollar question, ain't it? The leader's eyes glittered. But lucky for you, Little Mercy here knows exactly where to find Vasquez. And when you do, you can ask him yourself. Hope stood abruptly. Stop it, she said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard. Stop trying to turn him back into what he was. Stop trying to make him choose revenge over justice. She turned to Wade, her eyes blazing. Yes, I know where the gold is. Yes, he's been looking for me. And yes, there's probably someone in Petition Ridge who's been helping him. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching for his. But that doesn't change who you've chosen to be. That doesn't change your promise to Emma. He looked down at her upturned face and felt the crossroads opening before him. He could become Iron Wade again, hunt down Vasquez and the traitor, paint the territory red with their blood. Or he could stay true to the man Hope believed he could be. The artifacts in his vest pocket seemed to pulse with warmth. From his saddlebags, he pulled out a blood-stained piece of paper, a map he'd taken from one of Vasquez's men years ago. He'd carried it so long he'd forgotten it. Now he studied it with new eyes. And there, in the corner, was a mark he'd never understood. A small symbol that looked like a sheriff's badge. Tom Garrison. He breathed, the name falling from his lips like a stone. Hope squeezed his hand. Your brother. Wade nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Tom had always known where he would be. Tom, who'd become sheriff after his family died. Tom, who'd led the posse that had nearly captured them in the canyons. The map wasn't just a guide to Vasquez's operations. It was evidence of a conspiracy. And now Wade knew exactly what he had to do. The revelation hit Wade like a fist to the gut. 10 years of hunting the wrong enemy. 10 years of becoming a monster while the real betrayer wore a badge and called himself the law. Hope's small hand on his arm anchored him. Mr. Wade, she said quietly. Breathe. He forced air into his lungs, forced his hands to unclench. We need to get these prisoners to the marshal, Wade said finally, his voice carefully controlled. And then we need to get to Petition Ridge. Before what? Hope asked. Wade looked at the map. If Tom has been feeding information to Vasquez, then he knows about your survival. He knows you possess the location of the gold. And if the bandit leader is right, before he realizes we've captured his men and comes looking for you himself, Wade finished grimly. The scarred bandit laughed from his bonds. Too late for that, Iron Wade. We were supposed to check in tomorrow morning. When we don't show, he'll know something went wrong, and he'll come running. Wade studied the man's face, reading the truth. They had maybe 12 hours. After that, every minute would count. Tom Hendricks, Wade said, turning to the farmer. I need to ask a favor. It might put your family in danger. Hendricks straightened, his face resolute. After what you did for us, you can ask anything. I need you to take these prisoners to Marshal Crawford in Millhaven. It's a hard day's ride, but you'll be safer there. And give him this. He pulled out paper and began writing, documenting everything the bandits had revealed about Vasquez and his brother. What about you and the girl? Mrs. Hendricks asked, her eyes full of concern. We're going back to Petition Ridge, Wade said. There's something that needs to be settled. Hope looked at him sharply. We're going back, but if your brother is really working with Vasquez, then innocent people are about to get hurt, Wade finished. Reverend Morrison, the townsfolk who trusted Tom to protect them. They don't know what's coming. They deserve a warning. He walked to his saddlebags and pulled out Emma's prayer book. He'd avoided opening it for 10 years, afraid of the pain, but now, with Hope watching, he let it fall open. There, in his daughter's careful, childish handwriting, were the words, Prayer for enemies. Help me forgive people who hurt me, Papa, even when it's hard. Jesus forgave everybody. Love is stronger than being mad. His throat tightened. Her 8-year-old understanding of forgiveness was more profound than anything he'd learned in 40 years. She knew, he whispered. Knew what? Hope asked gently. How to forgive, even when she was little. She understood something I forgot. He closed the book and tucked it back into his vest. Emma would want me to save Tom, not destroy him, even after everything he's done. Hope smiled. That's what makes you different from Vasquez, Mr. Wade. That's what makes you worthy of Emma's love. They prepared for the journey. The little Hendricks girl, Sarah, ran up and pressed a small, crude wooden horse into Hope's hand. For good luck, she said shyly. Hope accepted it with solemn gratitude. As they mounted Ranger, Wade felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. But it was different now. Not the crushing burden of vengeance, but the purposeful weight of protection. He was riding toward danger, not to destroy his enemies, but to save his community. The night was clear and star-filled. They rode in silence for the first hour. "Are you scared?" Hope asked finally. "Yes," Wade answered honestly. "But not of dying. I'm scared of becoming the man I used to be. Scared that when I see Tom, knowing what he's done, I'll forget everything you've taught me about mercy." "You won't," she said with absolute certainty. "Because you're not that man anymore. Emma's love changed you. My friendship made you stronger. The man you've become doesn't break promises." They crested a ridge and saw Petition Ridge below, its windows glowing like earthbound stars. It looked peaceful, but Wade knew appearances could be deceiving. "There's something else," Hope said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about the gold." Wade's stomach tightened. "What?" "It's not just hidden somewhere random. Vasquez buried it in a very specific place." Her voice was barely audible over the hooves on stone. "He buried it under the Petition Ridge Cemetery, under the graves of people he's killed." Wade pulled Ranger to a halt, staring down at the town. "That's why Tom's been helping him. It's not just information. Tom's been protecting the burial site. Every time someone wanted to dig a new grave or investigate strange sounds at night, Tom would have been there to redirect them. He'd been actively protecting Vasquez's secret, right under the noses of the people he'd sworn to protect." "How many people do you think know?" Wade asked. "I think Tom's been alone in this for years. I think Vasquez owns him completely, and Tom's too afraid to break free." "But tonight," Wade finished, "when those bandits don't report in, Vasquez will come to collect what's his, including you." They resumed their descent. Two unlikely allies riding toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of everyone in Petition Ridge. Wade's hand rested on Emma's prayer book. Forgiveness didn't mean allowing evil to continue. Sometimes, mercy required action. Sometimes, love demanded courage. As they reached the outskirts, Wade made a decision. He wasn't going to hunt his brother like an animal. He was going to try to save him, even if it cost him everything. Because that's what Emma would want. And that's what the man Hope believed he could be, would do. The bronze church bell of Petition Ridge had been silent for 3 years, its rope frayed, its voice still. But as they approached the town under cover of darkness, Wade knew that bell would soon ring again. Not for worship, but for warning. They left Ranger in a grove of cottonwoods and moved like shadows between the buildings. "The sheriff's office first," Wade whispered. "I need to know if Tom's there, and if he's alone." They moved down Main Street, staying in the shadows. A single lamp burned in the sheriff's office window. Inside, Wade could see the familiar silhouette of his brother Tom. But he wasn't alone. 2 other men sat facing his desk. Wade saw the glint of weapons. "Vasquez's men," Wade breathed. "They're already here." Hope tugged his sleeve, pointing toward the cemetery just beyond the office. In the moonlight, Wade could see fresh disturbances in the soil. Not new graves. Excavation marks. "They're moving the gold," Hope whispered. "Getting ready to run." Wade's mind raced. 3 men in the office, possibly more in town. Tom, compromised and desperate. But instead of cold calculation, Wade felt a warm, protective fury. He thought of Reverend Morrison, of the families in their homes, believing they were safe. "We need to get to the church," Wade said. "That bell can be heard throughout the valley. It'll wake the whole town." They moved around the perimeter, avoiding the main street. The church sat on a small rise overlooking the cemetery. The front door was unlocked, as always. They slipped inside, their footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. Wade had been here only once before, for Catherine and Emma's funeral. Now, standing in the same space, he felt their presence not as an accusation, but as encouragement. "The bell rope," Hope whispered, pointing to a thick hemp rope that disappeared into the ceiling. Wade grasped it. It was heavy. It would carry its voice for miles, but it would also announce their presence to everyone, including the men in the sheriff's office. "Once I start ringing this, there's no going back," Wade said. "They'll know exactly where we are." Hope looked up at him. "Sometimes doing the right thing means putting yourself in danger to protect others. That's what heroes do." He thought of Emma's prayer, his father's compass, Hope's mercy stone. All had led him to this moment, this choice between safety and service. He pulled the bell rope hard. The bronze voice of Petition Ridge Church rang out across the desert night like a call to arms. The sound was deafening. He rang it again and again, sending its urgent message echoing off the canyon walls. "Wake up. Danger comes. Stand together." Through the church windows, he saw lights flicker on in homes, people emerging, confused but alert. And from the sheriff's office, he saw dark figures moving with sudden purpose. The battle for Petition Ridge was about to begin. The church bell's bronze voice had barely faded when the front door exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew as 3 armed men burst in. Wade recognized 2 as Vasquez's lieutenants from wanted posters, but the third man hit him like a physical blow. Tom Garrison stood in the doorway, his sheriff's badge catching the moonlight. His face was a mask of desperation and fury, his gun pointed directly at Wade's chest. "You should have stayed dead, brother," Tom said. "You should have just disappeared." Wade stepped protectively in front of Hope, his own weapons holstered. "Hello, Tom. It's been a long time." "Not long enough." Tom's gun hand trembled. "You have no idea what you've walked into." "I know enough," Wade said quietly. "I know you've been feeding information to Vasquez. I know you helped him target my family. I know you've been protecting his gold." Tom's face went ashen, but one of the Vasquez men, a lean killer named Cortez, laughed harshly. "Told you we should have killed him years ago, Garrison, but no, you had to get sentimental." "Shut up, Cortez!" Tom snapped, but Wade saw the fear in his brother's eyes. Hope stepped out from behind Wade. "Sheriff Garrison," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You don't have to do this. It's not too late to choose differently." Tom's eyes widened as he recognized her. "Mercy Morrison, the preacher's girl. Jesus, I thought you were." He stopped, understanding flooding his face. "You're the one Vasquez has been hunting." "Her name is Hope now," Wade said firmly. "And she's under my protection." Cortez spat on the church floor. "Your protection ain't worth spit, bounty hunter. Neither of you are leaving here alive." He raised his rifle toward Hope. Wade moved like lightning, knocking the barrel aside as it fired. The bullet splintered a pew. "Hope, get behind the altar," he commanded. But the girl stood her ground. "No more running," she said, reaching into her bag and withdrawing a small, leather-wrapped bundle tied with faded ribbon. "The original map," Tom breathed. "My father's copy," Hope confirmed. "The one that shows exactly where Vasquez buried 15 years of stolen gold. The one he died protecting." She looked directly at Tom. "The one that could set you free, Sheriff, if you're brave enough to choose justice over fear." Wade watched the war on his brother's face, the conflict between desperation and conscience. "You don't understand," Tom said, his voice cracking. "He has my daughter, Wade, my little Rebecca. She's been missing for 2 months, and he has her. If I don't do what he says—" The world shifted. Tom had a daughter, a child he'd never mentioned, a little girl being used as leverage. "Where is she?" Wade asked. Before Tom could answer, hoofbeats thundered outside, many riders approaching fast. Cortez grinned. "That'll be the boss, and he's brought enough men to burn this whole town to the ground." Through the windows, Wade saw at least a dozen riders surrounding the building. But he also saw townsfolk emerging from their homes, drawn by the bell. Reverend Morrison, Mayor Pritchard, and others. Hope stepped forward again, map clutched in her hands. Mr. Vasquez, she called out loudly. I know you can hear me. I have what you want, but I also have something to say. A new voice answered from the darkness, smooth and cultured. Little Mercy Morrison, you have led me quite a chase, but the chase ends tonight. Diego Vasquez stepped into the moonlight. He was smaller than Wade had imagined, elegantly dressed, with intelligent eyes and a commanding presence. The crescent-shaped scar on his cheek was exactly as Hope had described. But what struck Wade most was how ordinary he looked. This monster was just a man. I have your map, Hope said, and I'll give it to you. But first, you have to release Sheriff Garrison's daughter, and you have to let the people of this town live in peace. Vasquez laughed, a sound like silk over steel. You are in no position to make demands, little one, but I admire your courage. His eyes fixed on Wade. And you must be the famous Iron Wade. Wade reached into his vest and withdrew the faded photograph of his family. You killed my wife and daughter, he said simply, showing Vasquez the picture. 10 years ago, a ranch 15 miles south of here. I have killed many wives and daughters, Vasquez replied with casual cruelty. You will have to be more specific. Emma, Wade said, his voice steady. Her name was Emma. She was 8 years old. She loved pressed flowers and wooden horses. For the first time, something flickered in Vasquez's eyes. Recognition. Ah, yes. The little blonde girl who tried to hide in the root cellar. She fought very bravely for one so small. Wade's hand moved for his gun. 10 years of rage demanding blood. But Hope's voice stopped him. What would Emma think, Mr. Wade? What would she want you to do? He looked at the photograph, at his daughter's innocent smile, remembered her prayer about forgiving enemies. He thought of the wooden horse, Hope's mercy stone, his father's compass, all pointing him toward the man he was choosing to become. Slowly, deliberately, Wade holstered his gun and stepped forward, his hands empty and visible. Emma would want me to save Rebecca Garrison, he said quietly. She would want me to protect this town, and she would want me to give you a chance to choose mercy over murder. Vasquez stared as if he'd spoken in tongues. You want to show me mercy, after what I took from you? Yes, Wade said. Because that's what love does. It chooses healing over hatred. He held out the photograph. That little girl you killed. She taught me that forgiveness is stronger than revenge. And this little girl, he gestured to Hope, reminded me who I really am. His voice grew stronger. So here's my offer, Vasquez. Take the map. Take your gold. Leave this territory and never come back. Let Rebecca go home to her father. In return, I'll let you ride away instead of spending the rest of my life hunting you. The church fell silent. Everyone, Vasquez's men, Tom, Hope, the townsfolk, waited. Vasquez looked at the photograph for a long moment, then at Wade's face. You would really let me go? After everything? Emma would want me to, Wade said simply. And I'm done disappointing my daughter. 6 months later, Wade stood in the doorway of the small cabin he'd built on the hill overlooking Petition Ridge. He watched Hope tend the garden they'd planted together. Vegetables grew strong, and along the edges, wildflowers bloomed, reminding him of the ones Emma used to press in her prayer book. Hope had blossomed. She attended school in town, and she was teaching him things in return. How to laugh again. How to see beauty in small moments. How to live for love instead of loss. The events of that night had become legend. Vasquez had taken the map and disappeared into Mexico. Rebecca had been returned unharmed. Tom was no longer sheriff, but he was slowly rebuilding his life, making amends. His relationship with Wade was fragile, but they were working on it. Last week, Tom had brought Rebecca to visit. Wade had carved a wooden doll for her, a gift that reminded him painfully and beautifully of the toys he once made for Emma. Wade pulled a new Bible from his pocket, a gift from Reverend Morrison, on the day the adoption papers were finalized. Hope had insisted on the ceremony in the church, where their family truly began. The Bible was bound in soft leather. On the first page, their names, Wade Garrison and Hope Garrison, father and daughter. Inside, Hope had pressed new wildflowers, honoring the old while creating new memories. "Papa Wade," Hope called from the garden. "Come see what I found." He walked down the path. Hope was kneeling beside the tomato plants, her hands cupped around a tiny bird that had fallen from its nest. "It's hurt," she said, her voice full of concern. "But I think we can help it." 6 months ago, he might have seen it as just another casualty of a harsh world. Now, he saw possibility. "Let's take it inside," he said gently. "We'll make a little nest for it. Give it time to heal." As they walked back, Hope slipped her free hand into his. "Do you think it will fly again?" "I think," Wade said, looking down at his daughter's upturned face, "that with enough love and patience, anything can learn to fly again." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set. Hope was sketching in her journal, as she did most evenings. Tonight she was drawing the injured bird, but in her version, it was soaring high above the desert. "Hope," Wade said quietly, "I want you to know something. When I adopted you, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. You brought me back to life when I thought I was already dead." Hope smiled. And in that expression, Wade saw not just his adopted daughter, but the spirit of Emma, the wisdom of his father, the love of Catherine. "We saved each other, Papa Wade," she said simply. "That's what families do." He nodded, the truth of her words settling in his heart like a blessing. He pulled out his father's compass. The needle pointed steadily north. But now he understood. True north wasn't just a direction on a map. It was a choice. To love instead of hate. To build instead of destroy. To choose mercy. As stars began to appear, they sat in comfortable silence. In the distance, the church bell rang out the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the desert like a prayer of thanksgiving. Wade thought of Emma's wooden horse, which now sat on Hope's nightstand. He thought of the mercy stone in his pocket, warm against his heart. And for the first time in 10 years, Wade Garrison was truly, completely at peace. The giant had found his chains broken not by force, but by love. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and hope, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have another incredible story coming for you tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it.